Okay. I think we are live. I think this should be going fine. I have not done one of these in a long, long time, so hopefully this is working out okay. Might need someone to tell me if they can hear my voice, just make sure everything's going well, and then I'll get the viewers or the callers in, and we'll figure that out. I don't know. I'm pretty sure you can do a three-way call on Discord. I think you can. So if we can, I mean, hopefully, let's hope that is possible. All right. All right. Seems like we're good. So let me just check with them. Or at least one of them, and then we'll see if we can patch the second one in. Let me if I turn my gain up a little bit. Okay, let's see. You can? Okay, good. Thank you, Robbie. All right, I'm calling him in right now. Hello? Hello? Hi. I can hear you. Let me just make, you know what, it might actually be me. 1 second, because the voice is very low. Okay, I think we're good now. Can you say something? Okay. Oh, I don't know if they can hear you.
Streaming?
Okay, yep. And it looks like they can hear you now via they can hear you via the call, which is good. Okay. And then let's see. How do I screen no. Add friends to DM, is that it?
I think so.
Okay, let me see.
I never used.
Oh, I think I did it. Don't laugh at me, Rendon. I'm trying my best. Okay.
So take your time.
So I can hear Sergeant, and then Dre. Can you hear me? I think he's in the call.
I hear you. I'm here.
Awesome. Perfect. Okay. Okay. I've never done a three-way call with this. This is neat. Okay. So, if we want to start off, Sergeant, is it okay if I address you guys as Sergeant and Dre?
Sure. I'm good.
Okay. Perfect. Sergeant, if you just want to give a quick introduction of yourself.
So anyway, I'm Sergeant Sea Dog, and that's basically it.
Perfect. And Dre?
I am Dre, and that's basically it.
Excellent. And I'm Mac. All right. So, I don't know if you guys saw the title of the stream. Will Femboys lead to a Chinese invasion? Which I think is kind of what Sergeant we were talking about, sort of, in a general sense.
Okay.
But so why don't you? How about we start off by you sort of. So to give background to people, so you and I first started talking on my
Okay.
video for.
And by the way,
sorry, go ahead.
So first, sorry if I was sounding like a dick during that in the comments.
It's YouTube comments. That's how it always sounds. However, real quick, Sergeant,
Yeah.
would you be able to? Are you able to put yourself on push to talk?
What is that exactly?
It should be a setting. Yeah, it should be a setting so it that allows you to. It mutes your microphone until you're talking, because it sounds like you have a lot of background noise.
It should be on video or audio. No, it should be on audio, and you see push to talk. I'm positive. Okay. Yeah, voice and video, and there should be from voice activity or push to talk, because your mic is bad.
Seemed like it worked, because I don't hear it again. but as long as he can patch back in.
Yeah, he'll be alright. He should be all right.
Okay, well, while he's figuring that out, just to give people background, we first started talking, me and Sargent, on my video about the reject modernity, embrace masculinity videos. And we kind of got talking about sort of, I think the general disagreement is based on sort of, masculinity in today's day and age, especially in the West. Have men become less masculine? Have men sort of lost touch with their masculinity? Have they become quote unquote weaker? And what exactly does that mean? I think that was generally the contention and the disagreement. I think we actually probably agree, but probably for different reasons, or we probably have different views of masculinity and quote unquote strength.
I understand what.
Yeah. So generally, and then Sargent, he also mentioned where we got the title for the video was he was talking about how if the Chinese ever decide to invade the West, if there's too many femboys, then we can't defend ourselves, and that's sort of like what was like. Okay, we can start there and then build off of there. So, Sargent, are you still there?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, so we can hear you now, but we still have the background noise. Were you able to find like the push to talk option so you can?
I did, but it just mutes me in.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm
so
using.
Basically, it mutes you while you're not talking, and then when you go to talk, you can unmute yourself. That way, when you're muted, it doesn't. The background noise isn't in the background.
So basically, what I was saying was that, so far the left has came to the point where they're like embracing femininity in men, and basically anyone who is masculine is referred to as toxic. And I did some research before joining this stream, and a lot of it has to do with how we teach our boys and in schools. And basically, what I found out was, I mean, we could.
Well, here let's start off like this. So your contention, and Dre, I assume you agree with this, is that because of the left, or like liberals, the left in the United States, because of them embracing, they seem to view all masculinity as toxic or bad, and thus when men reject against that, when they sort of embrace their femininity, so in this case femboys, which I think that's sort of like an extreme case, but when men sort of embrace their more feminine traits, that is leading to a breakdown in society. And what we should do is make men that we should encourage them to reclaim their masculinity and sort of go back to, well, I guess what you would refer to as traditional masculinity. Maybe his mic.
There.
Were you talking to Dre?
I was talking to both. I was just trying to sort of like generally.
Okay, I'm gonna say my views on it. I'm like in the middle. Like I agree with both of your views. Like I'm here just to be the middle ground on both ways. I think we should have masculinity and like the other femboys and all that. It should be mixed. Like everyone could choose if they want to be a masculine or etc. They can choose instead of getting only one voice, or not one voice, getting exposed to one part of society instead of being exposed to both, so they can choose their own path per se.
Okay, yeah, I think that's pretty reasonable. But I guess the issue is that when we're talking about this sort of stuff, when we're talking about, so let's try. If I were to ask Dre and Sargent, when you're ready, if you guys want to go one at a time, what to you is masculinity? What comes to mind when you think of that? What does that term mean to you?
in my definition, it's, it's like being strong and independent, and basically, there's your someone who is willing to put effort into. Just can't find the right terms, but just overall being more strong and independent.
Okay, yeah. What about you, Trey? What
For
would you
me,
say comes to mind?
it will also be strong, independent, courage, bravery, and basically sacrificing oneself for others. That would be for me a strong type of person. Would be like a value in masculinity, like for men, women, etc. Just it should be like a strong type of value to live for.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, I would probably say the same thing. Strong, strength of character, honesty, integrity,
Yeah,
stuff like that. You know, like stuff that just and this is sort of like another issue I run into with not like with you guys, but just sort of in general. I think there is sort of a confusion when people. I think a lot of people think that femininity and masculinity are somehow like opposites. And so what ends up happening is, so if I say, hey, being masculine is being courageous, a lot of people, I think both men and women, might sort of interpret that as saying, oh, so you're saying being feminine means you're cowardly. And I don't
no,
really
no.
like that dichotomy. I think a better dichotomy is being like being masculine means you're being a man, and being non-masculine is being sort of like boyish. You're being a child in a way, or you're being immature. And I think that's a better dichotomy, because once you get into like feminine and masculine, like as like opposites, I think like they're more complementary in my eyes. I think if you try and when people start talking about them as if they're like opposites, that's when things start getting muddled and it
Yeah,
starts
then
getting
people will
weird.
start arguing about it and like, oh, this is that, whereas more the same but just different viewpoints than anything else.
Yeah, I think it's like we're basically talking about the same things. Like if I were to talk about what is being like a feminine woman, like what is being a woman, like a grown woman, I would say the same thing. It's like being independent, being strong,
Yeah,
being courageous. It's just the different context. Like there's certain different contexts when you're talking to either like a man or a woman, and so there. Okay, so it sounds like we agree in general on like what we're talking about when we're talking about masculinity, like the sort of the concept of masculinity. So here is where I think we might diverge a bit. In my view, I don't see how any of these things, so being strong, being independent, being courageous, being brave, sacrificing yourself for others, helping others in need, being honest, all of these, masculine traits that we all agree on, I don't see how, like, say if a guy enjoys wearing a dress or he like wants to be a femboy, I don't see how any of I don't see how doing that exempts him from any of these traits.
Um, when I made those comments, I wasn't really attacking those boys in general. I was attacking the institutions that encourage boys to do this, and if they're traditional masculine men, then they just demonetize them.
Well, okay, so that's a two factor. So encourage men to be femboys and uh, shut down traditional masculine. Okay, so when you say, so who exactly are the ones who are encouraging men to be femboys, and in what way would you say they go about doing so?
So far, I think a lot has to do with the left, and there are also a bunch of feminists that encourage boys to be more feminine.
Well, being feminine, I mean, like, I think, again, I think like embracing their feminine traits, or like traditionally feminine traits. So, for example, saying it's like, hey, if you're a man, you don't always have to just like bottle up your emotions. You can talk to friends or your partner about it, or go to therapy. Obviously, you want to be strong and independent, but in order to get there, sometimes you need to seek help. You need to sort of admit that, like, yeah, I'm not doing so well. I need help. I need to be strong enough to reach out for help so I can become the strong, independent man.
Yeah.
I've seen that. I've seen people talk about that. However, I have not seen it. Like, I don't think I've ever heard a feminist like, "Hey guys, you should be a femboy." I you know.
This is the first time hearing of this when Sergeant said, "Oh yeah, these schools are doing this." Like, this is the first time me hearing this.
Yeah,
I'm like,
again, I think we would all agree. Like, I've definitely heard like feminists or more people on the left talk about like, "Hey guys, you should open up to each other. You should be."
yeah, I heard that too, but like schools doing that, that's the first time me hearing it.
Oh no, I don't
basically,
think schools are though. Has a school
Yeah.
again? I don't even
Not
think
that I
I've
know
heard a
of.
feminist. I don't think I've ever heard a feminist say, "Hey guys, you should be femboys." I think they've said if you want to, if that's like what you want to do, you shouldn't feel ashamed of it. You shouldn't feel as though you're like, "Oh, that doesn't make me a real man, or that makes me gay." But I don't think I've ever.
it's
heard
okay
of,
if I say something.
Yeah, go for it.
I do think you should go and reach help if you're having problems mentally, but so far from what I've been hearing, schools have been trying to get like kids as young as kindergarten into gender studies, where basically they say they're supposed to quote unquote come up with a gender identity, and they're even taking little kids to drag queen concerts. Just overall, that's going to have a toll in their masculinity.
So what toll are we talking about? So again, I mean, depending on the context, like I've seen some of those drag shows. If it's like an actual drag show where there's actual like nudity being shown or any sort of like sexually suggestive something, then absolutely that's ridiculous. That should not be allowed. However, the majority of ones that I've seen have been ones like, hey, this drag queen is just going to read you kids like a story, and that's it. As for gender, sort of like gender identity in schools, I'm not saying this hasn't happened, and if it has, then I'm against it. But the most that I have heard is basically saying, "Hey kids, some people are gay, or some people are trans." That's really all I've ever heard to that extent. Now, have there been cases where like a teacher has crossed the line and like especially given the age range, has talked about some shit that like maybe like 5-year-olds don't need to be hearing? Absolutely, I think that probably has happened, and those teachers should be disciplined or they should be fired. But I think this kind of goes along with sort of what's going on now with the whole groomer narrative. Again, I think it's possible. It has happened, but as for being like this big, unprecedented, very common thing, that doesn't seem to be the case. It seems to me, again, I personally don't think that saying to kids, "Hey, some people are gay, some people are trans," is in any way a bad thing or going to lead to, I guess, what you mentioned. I don't think that is in any way going to lead to young boys having a crisis of masculinity come, their teenage years, if you will.
Basically, what I've came up from what I've looked at, luckily most parents are fighting back against most of the stuff that shouldn't be presented to children, but I think it's all right for some kids to learn like, hey, some people are gay, some people are trans, but basically what they're teaching in some of these programs is that if you're like a male, you're basically an oppressor, and in order to not be like that, not to be like the mean oppressor, you change your gender identity. Like, that's going to have a toll on their psychology and their...
Just real quick, I mean, like, so that kind of goes into the sort of like the critical race theory idea of like, hey, if we teach kids about critical race theory or tell kids in school that all white people are racist or oppressors, that can lead to some like white kids feeling guilty. So sorry, go ahead, Jay.
Like, with what you said, that is true, because I was, how am I put this, oppressed, not really, but I remember as I'm going off topic, but I'm just saying like what you said was true because when I was in high school, we're in history class, and she was saying every you're blonde hair, blue eyed, which I am, and said you will live, everyone else will die in the Holocaust. Basically saying you're white, you're blah blah blah, you will live, everyone else will die. Which is like for me, I felt guilty on that,
Well,
which sucked. Yeah.
well, I mean that technically is true. I mean, was the teacher saying it to like make you feel like? Did the teacher say
Yes,
like
pretty
you
much. She
piece
was
of shit?
pointing me out. She was pointing me
But
out.
but I'm saying like, was the teacher saying it in the fashion of like, hey, you should feel guilty about this, or was she saying it in the sense of like to kind of put in perspective, like, hey, of this entire classroom, only like this person would survive due to the the ideology of the Nazis.
She said it in such a way that made me like guilty.
But did she make you? I mean, like you may have felt guilty, but I'm saying, did she say it to make you feel guilty? Like, did she say like you're an oppressive piece of shit, or
The expression, yes.
wait, what was that? Sorry,
I'm saying yes.
that she did say it like,
She
hey,
said it,
you blonde haired,
yeah,
blue
pretty
eyed piece
much.
of shit.
Pretty much.
Okay, did that teacher? Did you say something and get her fired?
I didn't. I just felt angry as hell.
Okay, in the future, I would, if that is the case, I would absolutely like tell a principal and get that teacher fired because that's just ridiculous. Um, when I usually hear about this sort of stuff, like if we're talking about critical race theory or sort of like I guess you could say patriarchy theory, um, there is a difference between saying, because what I often hear about, I usually hear about this in the context of critical race theory, where, hey, if we tell kids that white people are oppressors in the United States, then that will make kids feel guilty about being white. Now, obviously, it depends on the teacher. Like, I'm sure there are some teachers who have agendas, and again, those teachers should be reprimanded. However, I don't think it is controversial to say, especially in the context of, say, U.S. history, that being white has its advantages, or at least over the last 50 or 60 years, how things have or in the past 50 or 60 years ago, that being white or I should say being another race, being black or Asian or Hispanic, what have you, it was a lot harder. There were a lot more institutional roadblocks in your way as opposed to you being white. But that's sort of what we're talking when we talk about white privilege. That's what we're talking about. We're not really saying it's like you're a privileged piece of shit and you should feel bad about that. No, that's like that's a kind of like a demonization of the concept of white privilege. But usually when we're talking about white privilege, or at least like in an academic sense, we're talking about, hey, in a certain environment, in this case the United States, if you take a black guy and a white guy, all else the same, that white guy is going to, on average, end up better simply due to less institutional roadblocks. Now, of course,
Yeah.
that isn't taking into account other privileges. So, for example, financial, education, the influence of your parents or your environment. But when we're talking about the concept of white privilege, we're talking about in like sort of like all else the same, on average, a white person will end up doing better than a black person due to certain institutional roadblocks in that black person's way, on average.
Yeah, pretty much. But I think we should go back to the topic instead of straying away and going to that type of
Yeah.
thing.
So just to kind of like go off of that. So I think to kind of tie it back for Sargent, I do think that in some cases there are like like the crazy rad femmes who are like all men are oppressors and I'm gonna rape it and all that stupid shit. But in general, when I hear about like when we're talking about like male privilege, it's more about talking about, hey, if you compare to like pre-feminism, like back in the 50s, there were many structures in place where men, not necessarily that men had it easy, but that men were put in positions where they had more freedom, more financial freedom, more freedom in general, all across the board. Whereas women were put into more. So, for example, in terms of if we're talking about, the family unit, the nuclear family, most men would have the freedom to, they could go work, they could, make money, et cetera, et cetera. Now, that's not to say that like those jobs were easy or they liked those jobs, but they had financial freedom. They could, if they wanted to, they could just walk out on their family. Whereas for women,
that was true.
Yeah,
I remember one of my teachers showing us a part of a textbook that said how to be a good housewife, and just all the stuff I've read in that thing. It was just crazy how much less freedom women had during that time.
Yeah, and it was more because women were barred from certain industries. So if a woman, say, didn't want to get married, or say wanted to divorce her husband because he was being abusive or wasn't being a good partner, she wouldn't have any recourse. If she divorced her husband, she's kind of SOL. Like she can't. She could get a job, but she wouldn't get paid very much for doing it. She couldn't really pursue a career to any meaningful degree. Some women could. It wasn't across the board, but on average, women were at a. So it's sort of funny when people talk about. I hear often it's like, well, the divorce rate back in the 50s was so much lower than it is today, and it's like, yeah, but that's not necessarily mean that those marriages were happy. In many cases, it may have meant that like these couples were together because of either social pressures or because of financial restrictions, especially on the woman's part. But yeah, so I think in that case, would you say that discussing something like that is demonizing masculinity or making men feel guilty?
I think we should learn about women's suffrage and about the feminist movements during the 50s and 60s, but so far a lot of radical feminists today are saying shit like all men are evil, kill all men are useless. That's probably gonna have some psychological toll on, let's say, just a boy comes in stumbling upon it. He might get damaged by looking at that stuff.
So I don't disagree. However, at least from my experience, this is kind of the sort of like irony of it. In those cases, like I'm not denying that there are some feminists who do say stuff like that. However, not only are they an extreme minority, like most women, if you like said, if you ask most women like that sort of stuff, they would be like, no, it's ridiculous as well. That's stupid. If you ask most feminists, like, hey, all men are bad, right? It's like, well, no, that's because most feminists will tell you that like we want equality between men and women. We want to help everybody. Now, again, there are some like crazy radical feminists who are just like way up their own asses and say like really stupid shit like that. However, again, it seems like it's a substantial minority. However, on the other hand, something I realized because I was kind of exposed to this when I was younger too. Like when I would watch a lot of like SJW cringe compilations and shit like that, like like SJW feminist cringe compilations on YouTube and stuff. And what I kind of realized while I was watching these things was that I would have never seen these things. I've never heard someone actually say something like that in real life. Like in my actual day-to-day life, I've never actually heard a woman or a feminist or anyone say men are bad, men should are all oppressors, and men should. The only time I've actually heard that is on like these SJW cringe compilations where they take some like psycho bitch on the street, this one woman on the street at like a feminist march. They take the video and put it on YouTube, and millions of guys see it. And yeah, so I do think that actually can affect men negatively. However, I think there's sort of like a weird factor there where it's the people who were against that idea, they end up kind of blowing it out of proportion and making guys think like, hey, this is what society thinks of men. And it's like, I don't really think that's like what society thinks of men. I think that's what this crazy bitch thinks of men. But I guess like the kind of what I'm trying to get at is that there seems to be this idea that a lot of men have that men or masculinity in general are demonized in Western society, the U.S., for example. I simply don't, and I used to believe this. I used to kind of like, oh yeah, men are totally like oppressed and demonized, and masculinity is oppressed and demonized. But then I kind of like, the more as time went on, the older I got, I kept kind of like asking, okay, so in what way? Like, okay, how? Like, is there actual evidence for this? And more, I kind of came up empty. Like, of course, men are disadvantaged or underprivileged in many ways, just like women are, just like everyone is in certain different ways. But there seems to be this idea that men or masculinity is like demonized in society, and that's what's hurting men. But I just don't really see that.
I should also mention the fact that so far a bunch of schools are viewing boys negatively in elementary and basic and middle schools. Basically, they're seen as noisy and aggressive, and so far from what I've stumbled upon in my research, schools have been banning games like tag and dodgeball, and basically are not treating boys the way they treat girls.
Well,
If I can, okay.
oh, sorry, just to go off on that, I agree that I think in many ways, especially in the schooling system, I think there is a sort of, or at least in my view, and I don't actually think this is. I think maybe it's better suited for most girls, but or I should rather say it isn't that it's better suited for girls. It's like it doesn't serve men or boys as well. I think that the way our schooling system is set up is really kind of bullshit, because it doesn't really, instead of like giving kids the ability to kind of like learn interactively, like with activities or projects or contests and stuff like that, it's mostly just like sit at your desk, don't talk, and listen to the teacher talking. I think especially for like young boys, like around like kindergarten through like 5th grade or something, that can be really bad, because now it's like, because you're not really like engaging with the boys, especially in a more hands-on manner. You're just saying like, hey, sit at your desk quietly and listen. First of all, I don't even know many adults who could do that all day. Like, I don't think I can. When I was in college, it was like that, and I was like, fuck, I can't fucking. I'm just sitting here in a chair for like 5 hours a day listening, and it was like I don't think that is like a good thing in general. I think in order to sort of like, the best way to learn is interactivity, like games or contests, or sort of some sort of like actual learning where it's more like hands-on learning.
That'll work for me, since I'm a visual learner, and if I just sit there at my desk and listen to a teacher talk, I get bored very easily.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and especially for younger boys, I think that disadvantages boys more than it does girls. However, in that case, I don't think that is a. So this is actually the irony. I don't think that society is like out to get men. I don't think society demonizes men. I actually think the main problem is that society doesn't care enough about men from a more. But the root of that is in the idea of traditional masculinity. Because if we sort of like go back to traditional masculinity, like what do we think of? We think of like men, and they're not allowed to cry, they're not allowed to feel or be weak, they have to just like push through it, or if a man has a problem, it's just figure it out. So I actually think a lot of the issues that face men today, it isn't a matter, most of them are not as a result of feminism or liberalism or any of that. I think the issue is more of the remnants of traditional masculinity, that men are expendable, that men aren't allowed to be weak, or they aren't allowed to emote. They simply have to just kind of like bear up and deal with it. But as we're seeing now, that is just that's terrible. That's doing young men, especially young men, horrible effects. Oh yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Like you said, that is true, because I was raised, or I was literally told myself like I shouldn't really show emotion, like show if I'm weak or crying, 'cause I feel like I'm weak when I cry, but in reality it's like it's a normal thing to do. But it took me a while to understand that, like before, like years ago I wasn't like that. I was like, I have to stay strong and not show my weakness. But like sooner or later, I realized like I should show it occasionally, or to show it like that I'm not like a emotionless person or a man, like a masculinity emotionless and not like show emotion, but I should show it so that other people know that I'm not that type of person.
Yeah, I think especially at least this is like sort of how I interact with men a lot, or at least in the online space. It feels like most of the men I speak to, they deal with extremes. So like when we're talking about say like men showing emotion, they either view men who show emotion as like these whimpering, blubbering, like weak pieces of shit who are just like crying 24/7, or it's the other extreme of like this like hyper masculine, like I don't ever talk about my feelings, I never cry, I never feel any of these emotions at all. And it kind of, in most of my, especially like on the comments of the video, the reject modernity, embrace masculinity, that's kind of how the impression I got from a lot of men was that they feel that like any sort of show of emotion, like crying or admitting you need help or things like that, that's that makes you not a man, that makes you weak. um Whereas yeah, I think Dre, I agree with you where it's like obviously you don't want to be a person who is just like a blubbering mess. You have to, you're an adult, you have to go out into the world, and you have responsibilities, you have a job, you have a partner. You have to be able to function, you have to be able to make it through the world. However,
You
the issue is that if we go in the other direction, if you never talk about your issues, if you never emote, if you never let your emotions out in any capacity, what'll eventually happen is that eventually you'll just break down. You're Because every time you have like a stressful situation or something in your life, happens that isn't good, like you feel like you want to cry, you're stressed, it's not like that goes away. That builds up somewhere in your mind or your heart or your chest. And
Yeah.
that builds up, and eventually, 5 years down the line, I
it
like that's
explodes.
and that's what I see happen to a lot of young men is that
Yeah,
yeah,
I have experience from that. Like I was holding it back for a long time for my own reasons, but I was holding it back and eventually one day I just exploded and I just couldn't control it. I just couldn't control it anymore. And yeah, you're right. It builds up if it and then eventually it explodes and you just let it all out, and then probably if you don't let it out occasionally the same thing will happen. So
yeah. And so when we're talking about men being emotional, I don't necessarily mean like, and this is sort of like what irked me about the whole like a lot of like traditional masculinity groups, or like gurus today, or the reject modernity videos or any shit like that, is that they tell men sort of like if you show weakness, you don't embrace weakness, you have to be strong, you have to just push through. And again, pushing through adversity is a good thing, it makes you stronger. But I personally, and this is what I think a lot of feminists or liberals or people on that side of the aisle would say, asking for help or admitting that you need help, or like seeking out guidance, etc., that is a form of strength. I think a guy attending therapy because he noticed that like, hey, I might need this because I'm getting too overwhelmed, I think that is a form of strength.
I
The
could
issue
agree with you.
yeah, the issue I see with a
Agree.
lot of like traditional masculinity present today is that they kind of ignore, like there are a lot of like traditional masculinity gurus who just, I mean, what's his face, Andrew, like Andrew Tate's the big one now. He has straight up said that therapy doesn't work, that depression isn't real, and like I think there's even a video of him saying that therapy doesn't work because, and the example he used was because Robin Williams committed suicide. And that, like, not only is that like a terrible misreading of that situation, like there were a lot of other factors involved, that like I find that very concerning. Like say what you will about Andrew Tate, like if you think he's funny, yada yada yada, But when he says things like that, when like, depression isn't real, therapy isn't going to work, you just need to like buckle down and push through, that I think that is going to do men a lot of, and that is what does men the most harm.
Is it okay if I mention something?
Yeah, of course.
Um, Basically, um, I really like this band called Slipknot, and their lead singer Corey Taylor. He Throughout most of his life, he suffered a very bad depression, and multiple times he tried to commit suicide. But eventually, he went out for help, and he eventually became open of it, and that sort of gave him strength to overcome it.
Yeah, absolutely. The issue, and this kind of goes back to Dre. I think you mentioned it when we're talking about masculinity. We talk about sacrifice. I think one of the most destructive things about the concept of traditional masculinity. Now, I'm not saying that, like, as a man, like, hey, you shouldn't try to help others, and you shouldn't try to, you shouldn't protect your family or your loved ones or support them, provide for them, of course. However, a big gripe I have with sort of like the concept of traditional masculinity in that context is that it kind of implies, or it seems to imply that a man's entire, it's very similar to how sort of like a misogynist would say women's only purpose is to provide, is to like serve a man, like to be there for a man and provide and, be submissive to a man. The idea of traditional masculinity, it makes it sound like the only point or the only purpose of a man is to sacrifice themselves for others, or to sort of put themselves in the line for others. Now, there can be honor in that, in the sense of like, yeah, you should provide for your loved ones. You should provide for, your friends, or help others. I think that those are all great things. But when it comes at the cost of sort of like, it kind of like, I kind of mentioned it before, it perpetuates this idea that men are expendable. They are just a product. They aren't really humans. They aren't really individuals. They're just men, and they go out and they are supposed to break their backs and break themselves down for everyone else, and they aren't given appreciation for it. And I think that is the most destructive remnant of traditional masculinity that even exists today. It seems like, again, a lot of the issues that men face aren't so much that like society is demonizing men. It's that society doesn't really care about men in the same way, or they don't view them as individuals. They just view them as like if men have a problem, just like, yeah, just suck it up and get over it. You're a man.
Yeah, that's how it works sometimes, sadly enough.
Yeah, and so I think the more liberal view, or the more left-leaning view, or the feminist view would be, hey guys, like obviously like being courageous, being strong, and being, having integrity are all good things. But there are toxic elements in the sense of like, hey, not opening up about your emotions, or not really not allowing men to emote in a way that helps them sort of process their emotions or their stresses. When men are just told to buckle down, like just stop crying, don't cry, don't worry, just keep going, push. Again, that can be a good thing. Like, you want perseverance, you want that sort of like mental fortitude, of course. But if there is no balance, if there is no processing of emotions, if there is no emoting at all, eventually you will hit a brick wall. And this is what I end up seeing with a lot of men, both young and old. I think actually the highest suicide rate, don't quote me on this, but I believe this is true. The highest suicide rate of men, I think, are men in like their 40s. Late 30s, 40s. And what they theorize is that because it's just by that time, men they've just been going and going and going and going, and by that point they just have all this pent up stress and all these emotions and the depression or despair that is built up, and it's just so much that even if they did go out to therapy, or even if they did seek help, in some cases it's just too late, because if you go that long without ever seeking help, it's just by the time you get to that age, by the time you get to that period in your life, it's just insurmountable. And I think that is one of the biggest threats for a lot of young men today.
Yeah. You hold it in for so long.
I could understand.
Yeah.
Hold it for so long that you can't take it anymore because you're just too long, too late. Like all the things that you wanted to do, you can't do it anymore because you held it in for so long.
Yeah, so when we're talking about something like toxic masculinity, and I know that that phrase has become super politicized. Um, However, when like I think the issue is that some people think that when they say toxic masculinity, they just mean, hey, if a man does something bad, that's toxic masculinity, and it's like, no, that's not really what we're talking about. What we're talking about are views of masculinity that lead to toxic outcomes for either the men or others. So, for example, um, for a lot of there are a lot of studies on this. If men are in relationships and their partner, their female partner, their wife or their girlfriend makes more than them, it increases the man's stress in the relationship. And obviously the theory is the idea of, well, men are supposed to be the breadwinners, men are supposed to be the providers, and so if you're with a woman and she makes more than you, that means you're less of a man. Like, that's something that I think is kind of stupid. I don't.
Yeah, that makes no sense. It should be equal. It should feel like either
And
like it shouldn't matter if they make more than you. It matters if the
if
relationship is strong and stuff like that.
if you guys are, all what matters is whether if you guys are happy together. That's what I think a relationship should be like.
Exactly. And now, to be fair, I think when we're talking about toxic masculinity, I think there are both men and women who perpetuate this. I think there are just as many women who perpetuate toxic masculinity than men do. Like, there are plenty of women who said, like, yeah, I could never date a guy if he he cried in front of me, or if he doesn't make as much as me, or if he doesn't make a certain amount, or doesn't have like a nice house or a car.
Yeah,
Um,
those type of
yeah,
people, it's bad news all
exactly.
around.
Yeah, but then on the other hand, it's like, well, those are not women you want to date. Trust me, like those are not women you ever want to
Oh, I can
date
tell
or
you.
marry. Yeah.
Give them a cold shoulder.
Yeah, so it's really not a battle between men and women. It's a battle between those who kind of hold on to these toxic ideas of what masculinity and femininity are, and people who are more flexible, people who are more, well, just because uh, a woman has a career doesn't make her less feminine, and just because a man stays at home with his kids, the stay-at-home dad, doesn't make him less masculine. And I think that's sort of because what I often hear is that, like, this idea of like, well, it's masculinity versus femininity, it's men versus women, and it's like, it's no, I think it's more, at least from what I see, people who are trying to kind of like hang on to these very rigid roles, these very rigid gender roles, and people who are trying to be more flexible with them. And so that's sort of where, at least for me, where I see the idea of, femboys. It's not so much of like, hey, if you shouldn't be a toxic man, you should be a femboy. I've never actually heard like a feminist or
Never
anyone
heard that
say
either.
that.
I never heard that ever.
Yeah, what I have heard is, hey, just because if you're a guy and you like wearing dresses, or you like being a femboy, that doesn't make you less of a man, because when we're talking about masculinity, that doesn't, just because if you're a guy and you like wearing dresses, that doesn't mean that you aren't strong. That doesn't mean you don't have integrity. That doesn't mean you're not honest. That doesn't mean that you're not a good father. That doesn't mean that you're not a quality friend, or that you help your friends.
Yeah.
It's yeah, and so my that was kind of like my issue with like the reject modernity, embrace masculinity stuff, was that I even say in the video, hey, lifting is great, strength training is awesome. Like, I think that's all cool and good, and I think that's very good for young men. But it seems like the videos, in addition to saying that good stuff, they're also saying bad stuff, where it's like, hey, if you aren't physically strong, that means you're not a real man. Or if you show emotion, or you identify as LGBTQ, that
Yeah.
you're not a real man.
That makes
For,
no sense.
yeah, and
Like
so yeah,
even the weakest of people are the strongest of people. like, or and likewise, like it's like either way, the strongest or the weakest, there still can be good people in those type of people, like good,
You don't have
strong.
to be just physically strong. You could be
Yeah,
mentally strong.
Exactly, and I think that's the key. I think you put it perfectly, Sergeant. I think the issue I have with those videos is that they equate mental and physical strength. I've met I've met femboys or like guys into pup play. Like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with that kink, but I've met guys who are into pup play or who are femboys who are like excellent people. They're great. They're great guys. They're good friends. They're intelligent. They have integrity. They protect their families. They're good. They're good, strong men. And then I've met bodybuilders, guys who are like jacked and like can like bench 300 pounds, 3 plates, and they're weak. They are cowardly. They cheat on their girlfriends. They aren't in control of their emotions. They like lash out, and So that's sort of like that was my gripe with the videos, was that it seemed that it was saying that like in order to be a man you have to be physically strong, and if you're not, then you're not a man. Now again,
yeah, that's not the case.
yeah, again, I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with like yeah, strength training or like a martial art or boxing. Those are all great things. Those are good things that can help you build discipline. But when we link that sort of stuff to when we link that sort of stuff to just saying, hey, this is what a man is, the more rigid we are with that, I think that's what leads to bad outcomes for men. Because say a man, I've even seen like men say like, hey, I like hey, like have you ever tried like knitting, or have you ever tried something like that? And like I've had guys be like, well, no, that's a girl thing. And it's like, what the fuck does knitting have to do with like being a man or a woman? That's
My dad was friends with a guy on his college football team, and he knitted.
yeah, it's in fact, I would say that like what a real man would do is like if a guy came up to him and was like, hey man, knitting is for girls. What a real man would say is like, well, fuck you, I like knitting, so go fuck yourself. I'm gonna do what I want. That's to me.
Yeah, that's what I would say if I was into knitting. But I don't know if okay, what do I do that's kind of as girls in other circles? I really don't have any like work like I don't really have anything to say for it, but I know I have something that are considered like that's for girls, but for the most part, I really don't care. I like what I like in a story.
Yeah, like for me personally,
I
like I like video games, I like YouTube, I like boxing, I like weightlifting, but I also like watching The Bachelorette with my girlfriend. I know I shouldn't like enjoy that show, not because it's like feminine, because it's like absolute trash, but I really like that show. It's very entertaining for me.
uh, I do. Honestly, I I like building collectible Legos, and even though there are a number of times where my siblings would just say, "Hey, that's for little kids," I'm just like, I don't care.
Exactly. It's so dumb. Like it's like that's sort of like what or at least what I'm talking about when I'm talking about you know toxic gender rules or toxic gender ideas or toxic masculinity.
Yeah,
It's like ideas of masculinity that lead men to worse outcomes. It literally is just like, again, like or how many guys have like, there's like, especially like in today's day and age, like so many men are like horrified of being seen as like gay or being seen as, because they think that like to men, and it's like, no, I don't like, why are we making a big thing of this? Why does that matter so much to
I think
these sort
I
of
think
people?
if I can say, I think because me myself, I am in that area, but I'm not gonna say it. But I like for me, I'll be scared of getting like rejected in a way. I think that's why everyone's not like scared of it. I think it's not because of like saying you're fem. I think it's because they're being rejected by others. Like for example, you're saying that out to your parents or so on, they're just fear of getting rejected as like who they are
Yeah,
per se.
exactly. That's a good point. It's especially like it's no coincidence that in LGBT, or sorry, in religion, I think the rates of depression and suicide for LGBT youth in religious households is much higher than within non-religious households. Not because there's anything necessarily like I don't know the way to put it, but like,
I know how you're saying it.
yeah, it's because that if you grow up in an environment that says that like, hey, you being gay is like
Wrong
not,
and like
yeah, sinful or evil or like not good, then yeah, that's obviously going to lead to a lot of stress and
it's like I'm gonna explain it for you, but I understand what you're trying to say. It's like saying I'm in a religious household and saying, oh, you can't like you got to be a strict like religious like gays go to hell or whatever, and like that's a religious household. So basically, someone that is gay in a religious household is afraid of saying it, otherwise they would think, oh, they're gonna get rejected by their parents or go to hell and etc. Where that's not really the case, just built up from the centuries and just a false perception of things.
There are some very religious countries in the Middle East that'll literally kill you if you're gay.
Yeah, like Egypt, for example, but I'm not gonna go there.
I remember watching a documentary on Palestine, and an interviewer asked a religious leader, "Hey, what's worse, a son who's like a drug addict or a thief or a murderer, or a son who's gay?" And most of the cases, the priest would just say, "Being a son, having a son who's gay is worse."
yeah, and I think unfortunately, well, I mean, I think that like I don't know if you have seen it yourself, but I do think that like they reject a lot of like traditional masculinity, like masculinity gurus or like red pill stuff or the reject majority stuff. I do think that there is sort of like a weird crossover with a lot of like religious fundamentalism, like a lot of like Christian, like white traditional Christianism, which is a bit strange. It kind of
Oh
like
shit.
makes things a little bit weird. Um,
We should
oh,
also mention radical Muslims,
exactly,
Um,
and especially like in especially like in say like Middle Eastern nations, these are like if we want to talk about like going back to like strict gender roles, like the women are just like completely immiserated in a lot of these cultures. Now, obviously, like I don't think in today's day and age, or even like during the 50s, it ever was like that extreme. However, it was pretty substantial. And so when I hear a lot of like of these like guys talk about masculinity and they're like, yeah, things were better in like the 50s, and I'm like with like traditional gender roles, and it was like, maybe for
um,
you. I think for the men, I think it was a lot better in many ways, but not so much for the women.
I'm not. This is totally off topic, but I'm just gonna say that Queen Elizabeth II just died like 18 minutes ago.
Yeah, I saw that. I was gonna mention
Yeah, like
something before we left, but I was like, "Whoa, holy shit!" Well, I saw that
rest
she
in
was.
peace.
I saw that there was a announcement that she
she died. Yeah, I just looked on the news as a friend told me. I'm like, wait, oh, she died 18 minutes ago. I'm like, oh shit.
holy shit. I saw
Who's the
one that
king?
said that she was being hospitalized, but then like 5 seconds later, it's like, oh shit, wow.
Ah, damn, that's the I ever. She was on the throne for like my entire life, basically.
70 years. Holy shit.
Jeez.
She's been on the throne when my dad was born.
Yeah. I wonder who's the king now or queen.
Yeah, I don't
Probably
know
king.
actually. Oh, here it is.
No.
She is succeeded by her eldest son and heir, the Prince of Wales, who becomes King Charles III.
Huh. Long live the
Jesus.
King of England.
Well, then we can segue into fucking the monarchy and all that shit.
Dun, 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 dun,
Yeah.
dun, dun, dun.
But yeah, so basically, I
Yeah.
think we had I'll let you guys go because I've kept you for an hour. But like, I think we had a good discussion. I think the general gist of what I'm trying to say is that when we're talking about toxic masculinity or we're talking about sort of like deconstructing masculinity, what we're sort of saying is like it's not so much that we're trying to make men women. It's simply that we're trying to redefine what being a quote unquote man is so that it helps men overall as opposed to hurts them. So like for example, like yeah, being a man is not about being straight. Being a man doesn't necessarily mean you have to have like huge muscles or be able to bench like 400 pounds. Being a man is about providing for your family, about being a good friend, about having honor, integrity, honesty. And what I end up seeing with a lot of these like what a lot of like masculinity gurus nowadays is that they sort of lean on they'll say all that stuff, but then they'll also turn around and say it's like, oh, look at these femboys, oh, look at these gay boys, oh, look at the LGBTQ movement, and they'll start to sort of like, and again, consider that like if you're a like say like a gay kid or you're a kid who likes knitting or something, and you're trying to find out like, well, I want to feel like a man, and then these same people who are telling you to be like, hey, be strong, be honorable, be courageous, then also like make fun of you for being gay or being a femboy or liking knitting or some like shit like that. It's wait, hang on, okay, now I'm starting to feel self-conscious, now I'm starting to feel shamed, and then these men end up having to forgo things that they enjoy, which makes their lives objectively worse.
Just overall, be strong and have some gratitude.
Yeah, I think
which
that's yeah.
oh,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. My bad.
I think the schools today should be like, you can be this, like you can be gay or whatever, but also if you're like, you can also show emotion. You can reach out to others, so you don't like feel bottled up emotions. Otherwise, you just explode. Like I preach that to others when they're feeling down. Like I say, you don't need to do this. You can preach out to me. Like I'm usually like, for example, on Twitter or to others, I always say, you don't. I'm here if you need to let out your emotion, because I don't. You shouldn't let your emotions get bottled up. And that goes for girls and men. It's not always about men, like men doing that. It's the same thing for women, because I have a lot of friends that are girls that do the same exact thing. So
Yeah, I think the key there is not to say that like women also don't face adversity. I think, but when it comes to like gender expectations, at least
yeah,
nowadays, I think women are given a lot more, or at least we're getting to that point. Women are given a lot more freedom. So, for example, a woman can wear a dress or a woman can wear jeans and a t-shirt. But if a guy wore a dress, that would look, people would be like, "Whoa, what the fuck, bro?" And it would
they're
so
not
it can,
used to that.
yeah, I think men in some ways it depends on like, again, it's not like all or nothing, but I think in some ways men are still restricted more by, like these toxic gender roles that force them into like very narrow lanes about what being a man is, and any deviation from that makes you less of a man. And I think that is especially what is causing men the most harm nowadays. They don't really understand. They want to feel like men, but they don't know how to, and they're getting all these conflicting messages of like, hey, if you want to be a man you have to do this, but if you want to be a man you can't do this. And it's no surprise that so many men get so confused.
I mean, one time a group of friends came to the place I worked at, and they were wearing like maid skirts, but that was sort of like a joke, and we had a good laugh at that.
Yeah, but like, but then that's like sort of like the issue is like, okay, so but what's the joke there? Like, if a guy wants to wear a skirt, why is that something you would mock? Because if you saw a woman wearing jeans or a plaid shirt, you probably, oh, it's just a woman wearing what she wants. But yeah, but gentlemen,
Sorry.
thank you. Oh no, don't worry about it. Gentlemen, I'll let you go. Thank you for coming on. I think it was a very productive discussion. I think YouTube comment discussions are always a lot more heated and a lot more adversarial. But that's sort of part of the reason I like to have like these conversations, is because I think they get a lot less. They become a lot more productive. We can sort of like, I don't know if
Yeah,
it's, yeah, I don't know exactly what it is about like YouTube comments or like Twitter comments, but it's like it never it never leads to like a decent conversation because you're always sort of like, it feels like you're always like talking past each other, or you're always like trying to like see the worst faith take of each other. Um, Twitter, YouTube comments.
You're more likely you're more likely to be mean with someone online than you are by talking to them.
Yeah, I think just like that sort of like discourse is just, I don't know why, but like when you're actually talking to someone, then you can actually have like a decent conversation and come to like an actual
Agreement.
yeah, or at least try to see. Yeah, yeah, guys. Thank you, Robbie. Just mentioned in the chat. Thank you for being. The last couple of people we've had on have been like severely unhinged, like very much so. So thank you for being very good conversationalists, and I think we had a very productive discussion.
Of course. A wonderful day.
Thank you. Take care, you fellas. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I accidentally left the call, but thank you for your time.
Thank you, man. Thank you for coming on.
Have a good one.
All right. Yes, that was nice, Robbie. It was very nice to have a good conversation. Given our discussion on YouTube, I was afraid it was going to get weird with like China and all that stuff, but no, it turned out very well. So I have to run, everyone. Thank you for joining. It's a day of mourning for the Queen. She has passed. It happened like 15 seconds ago. Well, not 15 seconds ago, a couple minutes ago. But yes, thank you very much for coming up. Or they already left. Thank you very much for tuning in. I'll try to do more of these. I just usually don't have people to talk to. Obviously, like, I shouldn't say that. Like, we can always talk about stuff. Like, anyone can come on, but it's more of like, I try to find people I have disagreements with because I like to try to find a middle ground, or try to like, because if it's just two people like having a circle jerk agreeing with each other the entire time, then it's kind of like, well, then what's even the point? It kind of gets boring. But yeah, well, again, thank you for tuning in, and I will talk to you or chat with you or see you guys another time.